The standoff on the Oceanic Viking has become perhaps the most bizarre chapter in the history of efforts by asylum seekers to come to Australia. It's now begun its fourth week, with the Australian government still suggesting an end might be in sight. Kevin Rudd says Australia and Indonesia have infinite patience, but the politics of this issue are finite, as measured by opinion polls, and as they impact on Parliament when it resumes next week. This has been an intriguing test for the Prime Minister, who has mostly dominated the opposition in his first 2 years and is not used to this kind of stubborn defiance, or the embarrassing headlines that have gone with it. Political editor Chris Hillman reports.
We have infinite patience in handling this matter. Indonesia has infinite patience in dealing with this set of circumstances, as does the Australian government have great patience in dealing with this.
It's 22 days since the Oceanic Viking picked up 78 Sri Lankans from their stricken boat in Indonesia's search and rescue zone, and more than a fortnight since it dropped anchor off the island of Bintan. The asylum seekers are refusing to leave the ship, and the political debate is anchored with it.
Australia has infinite patience on this matter.
20 days ago, Australian officials said that they were optimistic the standoff would be soon settled, explaining that things move slowly in Indonesia. It wasn't, and the Oceanic Viking's Groundhog Days began and quickly assumed a familiar rhythm. For example, once a week, permission to stay in Indonesian waters has to be renewed.
Yesterday, our government have decided to extend the security clearance of the vessels until Friday the 13th of November. The main reason is because we are going to give more ample time to the Australian government to persuade the Sri Lankan boat people to be ready to disembark from the vessels. And I think we are going to show the Australian government that this is what we can do, and this extension is the last, and we are not going to consider extending another days.
Another routine is that every statement from Indonesia that jars with the Australian government line is reinterpreted here. Australian officials say they hope there will be a settlement by the weekend, but they add that they're confident that permission to stay will be extended if negotiations drag on. And here the government is saying that if the Sri Lankans get off the ship, they'll be housed in the community and not in the Tanjung Pinang detention centre. An Indonesian Foreign Affairs spokesman has ruled that out. One thing that has changed is the government's fortunes in the polls. Last week's news poll saw its primary vote plunge 7%, a reading which even the pollster urged should be taken with a good dose of caution.
The job of being Prime Minister is to take decisions in the national interest, some of which may be popular, others of which are not.
Newspoll had one real and immediate effect. It drove the Prime Minister into a flurry of media engagements, but today's Nielsen poll has been kinder. The 1 percentage point shift on the primary vote is well inside the margin of error, and the government still enjoys a thumping lead. But those polled were evenly split on how it was handling the surge of boat arrivals.
When it comes to Australia's border protection policy, let me be absolutely clear that policy of ours in the Australian national interest will not be changed in response to any protests, any threats of harm, any threats of self-harm. We will take as long as it takes to resolve this matter and any other matters into the future.
In the Indonesian port of Merak, there's another asylum seekers boat and another standoff. It's docked, but most of the Sri Lankans on board are refusing to disembark. And the group's spokesman, who calls himself Alex, has been identified as Sanjeev Kuhendra Raja. He has a criminal record and was deported from Canada.
All I can say is these mistakes were made when I was young, confused, under peer pressure, and under a lot of adolescent things that go through any teen's mind at that time. And it's been almost 9 years since my conviction and since I was arrested.
The government is now trying to stem the flow of asylum seekers at one of the sources. The Foreign Minister Stephen Smith has been dispatched to Sri Lanka for a round of meetings, but trying to make a difference there will be no small task.
The situation in Sri Lanka is very volatile. It still is very volatile. It was called a war that would not end, an intractable conflict. And the situation is so tense because this has been seen in many quarters as a victory for the Sinhala nation, for the Sinhalese people. It's been trumpeted as that. The government played to that. The government played to the Sinhalese chauvinism. And it's hard to undo that. To undo that and make the people like the Tamil people and the Muslim minorities feel comfortable that their civil rights and their human rights will be respected in the new Sri Lanka.
Well, clearly we're looking to engage with Sri Lanka to try and provide assistance to reconstruct the country. We've obviously provided a lot of aid already, and the idea is to work with them to ensure that the Tamil people feel safe.
This affair has exposed the Prime Minister and his office to an intriguing political pressure test, and last week's panicked response to just the hint of trouble in the polls has been noted by all. So if the Oceanic Viking doesn't offload its passengers before Parliament resumes next week, it's likely that Kevin Rudd's patience will also be sorely tested.
Political editor Chris Uhlmann.